During the Second World War, there would be a huge amount of civilians who were killed and executed by the Germans or the SS. Inside of the concentration camps, there were millions of people who were sent to camps, such as Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz, and many would not make it out alive. A huge number were persecuted during the war, and the Nazis sought to punish those whose religious beliefs called them to question Hitler and his politics. Inside of Dachau concentration camp, there were a number of priests who were sent to the camp because of their roles in the clergy and their congregations, and the priests of Dachau were treated awfully. One man who was sent to the camp, but would never make it out alive, was Titus Brandsma, a Dutch Carmelite friar and priest, who was also a professor of philosophy. He was an incredibly well-read man, an intelligent person. However, inside of Dachau, he was brutally killed. Join us today as we look at the horrific execution of the Saint of Dachau, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Born Anno Titus Brandsma, it was actually his father who was known as Titus. He was born in a small village in the Netherlands in 1881, and his parents ran a small dairy farm, and they were committed and devoted Catholics, who were very strict in their religious devotions. He had a number of siblings, and all of them except one sister would enter religious orders. At the age of 11, Brandsma studied at a secondary school in Megen, and at a Franciscan-run minor seminary for boys who were considering a vocation as a priest. But then, he entered the Carmelite Friars in Boxmeer on the 17th of September 1898, at the age of 18, and he took the religious name Titus in honour of his father, and he was then known as Titus Brandsma. He took his first vows in October 1899, and was then ordained as a priest in 1905. Titus was a doctor of philosophy also, and he was awarded this in Rome, and then from 1909 to 1923 he lived in Oss and worked as a teacher and writer. He also worked on translations into the Dutch language, and he then became the head of a secondary school. In 1921, he was involved in sorting out controversy regarding a Belgian artist's depiction of the Stations of the Cross, and it's clear that he was considered a powerful and important member of the church. He also helped to found the Catholic University of Nijmegen, and he there worked as a professor of philosophy and also as an expert on the history of mysticism. He continued to be available for everyone and was known for being a man who always had time for everybody. Titus also worked as a journalist and an ecclesiastical advisor, and he regularly stayed at a friary where he learned English. He completed a lecture tour of America and Canada and would speak to different orders. Titus Brandsma even visited Niagara Falls, and he wrote of the falls, "I not only see the riches of nature of the water, its immeasurable potentiality, I see God working in the works of his hands and the manifestation of his love." His life before the Second World War seemed great and peaceful, but then as the war broke out, his life would be shattered, along with thousands of other key religious figures. Following the invasions of the Netherlands by Nazi forces and subsequent occupation, Titus Brandsma's work then turned to fighting against the Nazi ideology, and he wrote about it in great deal. He warned of the evils of Nazism, and also was in opposition to the limits they placed on education and also the newspapers and press. This brought some unwanted eyes onto Titus's work, including the Gestapo, who were keeping a close eye on him. However, in January 1942, he decided to deliver by hand a letter from the Conference of Dutch Bishops to the editors of Catholic newspapers, and the bishops ordered them not to print Nazi documents. A new law had been brought in that said they had to publish Nazi documents and propaganda, but by signing this he incurred the wrath of the Nazis. Titus managed to visit 14 other editors before on the 19th of January 1942 he was arrested at the Boxmeer monastery. He was held as a prisoner of the Gestapo and was imprisoned in various different towns before he was transferred to Dachau concentration camp. Dachau had a history of imprisoning priests, and a total of 2,720 clerics and priests were held there, and it became a focal point for church prisoners and priests of the Nazi regime. The SS to begin with allowed a local priest to celebrate Mass with them on Sundays, but then this was discouraged. Clerical prisoners to begin with were held in punishment blocks when they arrived, They would then be distributed amongst other blocks. But then other members of the church were transferred to Dachau, and they even managed to make a chapel there. It was called Our Lady of Dachau, and it was said the patient work by clergy and lay people alike had in the end achieved a miracle. The chapel was 20 metres long and 9 metres wide, and could hold about 800 people, but often more than 1,000 crowded in. The walls were painted with light green crosses, alternating with lilies. Special care was taken of the decoration of the east end behind the altar. The windows had been made to look like stained glass, but in September 1941, when German clergy was separated from the others, the windows looking out of Block 28 were covered in a thick coat of white paint. Religious activity outside the chapel was banned, and the treatment of clergy was disturbing at Dachau. They were forced to work incredibly hard and had hardly any food, and many gave food away as they believed they would help others to live. Of the 2,720 priests that were sent to Dachau, over 1,000 were killed there, and one of them would be Titus Brandsma. Whilst he was at Dachau a number of months, he would have interacted with the priests there. However, he soon became ill, and his health began to quickly fail. He may have succumbed to disease and caught illness such as typhus, which was very common at the camp, but because of his health, Titus was transferred to the camp infirmary and hospital. But the problem was that once the inmates went there, they were usually killed straight away or within a few days, and they were often given very little care. On the 26th of July 1942, a nurse on his ward would administer his execution and killing. She approached Titus, and then she administered a lethal phenol injection, which killed him instantly. This was common inside the concentration camps, as nurses and doctors sought to liquidate and kill prisoners who were very ill. They did this also to prevent disease spreading, and then following this, Titus was then cremated. It's believed that the nurse killed Titus Brandsma as part of the programme of medical experimentation on prisoners, and Titus was probably subjected to a horrific autopsy. However, today Titus Brandsma is considered to have been a martyr within the Catholic Church, and he was beatified by Pope John Paul II in 1985. But further praise would come as Pope Francis recognised a miracle linked to Titus, who was killed in hatred of the faith, and for this advancement was made to make him a saint. The canonisation ceremony was made for the 15th of May 2020, and more than 50,000 people saw the Pope canonise Titus Brandsma and 9 other saints at a Mass in St. Peter's Square. Today Titus Brandsma is considered the saint of Dachau, and his actions before the war were in line with his religion, and he was incredibly devoted to his faith. He saw the Nazis as an attack on his faith, and he would try all he could to oppose them in any way he could. But ultimately the Gestapo would catch up with him, and he was sent to a terrifying concentration camp, where he was ultimately murdered and killed by an SS nurse. His story is one which certainly deserves to be remembered. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.